Welcome to Starbound. My name is Veronica and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please check below to see if you're subscribed to our channel. It's 100% free and just allows our stories to pop up on your feed more often. Torsion's thick fingers traced along the worn grooves of his captain's chair, following patterns carved by decades of similar motions. The familiar hum of the engines vibrated through his calloused skin, a sensation as natural to him as breathing. Some might find the constant rumble annoying, but to Torsion, it was the sound of home. He shifted his bulky frame, the chair creaking in protest. A small bridge around him glowed with the soft light of status displays, each one showing exactly what he expected. Everything running smooth and normal, just the way he liked it. His eyes gleaming a pale blue against his rough, bark-like skin, reflected the gentle pulse of the navigation markers. The daily maintenance report chimed softly. Torsion smiled as he read through it. 3 minor repairs completed by the drones while he slept, and 1 scheduled for later. The drones did good work, but he liked checking anyway. Gave him something to do during the long stretches between stations, and it felt right to know what was happening on his ship. His ship. Not technically true. The company owned it, like they owned everything. But Torsion had lived in these corridors longer than anyone else. He knew every creak, every worn panel, every quirk of the aging systems. The drones might do most of the actual work these days, but he still walked his daily rounds, heavy footsteps echoing through familiar passages. The galley still had that slight list to the left that the repairs bot could never quite fix. The cargo's hold's third pressure seal still hissed a half a second longer than the others. The observational lounge's starboard viewport still showed the tiny stress fractures, too small to need fixing, but just visible if you knew where to look. Torsion knew where to look. He paused in the corridor, running one massive hand along the wall. His thick skin had worn smooth patches in certain spots over the years, marks of routine that even the automated cleaning systems couldn't erase. Some corporate types had suggested repainting once, but Torsion liked the wear, showed the ship had history, had life. The daily status update scrolled across his wrist display, but he barely needed to read it. Cargo secure, course stable, fuel reserves normal. Simple things, really. Didn't need much else out here between the stars. Just him, his ship, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing exactly where he fit in the universe. A maintenance drone zipped past, its anti-grav fields humming. Torsion watched it go with genuine affection. Good little workers, those drones. Did their jobs without complaint, just like him. They had their place, he had his. That's how things worked best. Everyone knowing their role and being content with it. He made his way back to the bridge, spines rustling softly against the corridor ceiling. The ship had been built for his kind, but even so, Torsion was large enough to leave his mark, literal marks, in some places where his head brushed too often. More history, more life. The stars streamed past the main viewport in familiar patterns. Torsion settled back onto his chair, feeling the warm fabric conform to his shape. The next station was still days away, but he didn't mind. Out here, distance was measured in comfortable routines and quiet moments. In daily rounds and maintenance reports, in the steady pulse of engines that had become as much a part of him as his own heartbeat. Simple work for simple folk, some might say, but Torsion knew better. There was pride in doing your job well, in being exactly what you were meant to be. He was a cargo hauler, a space trucker, and that was enough. More than enough. He smiled, watching the stars slip by. Another day had begun. Another cargo run underway, just the way he liked it. The message terminal chimed its morning alert, the sound echoing through Torsion's quarters. He'd been awake for hours already, old habits from his early days when everything needed manual checking. But he still liked keeping to the official schedule, gave the day proper structure. The screen lit up with its usual cool blue glow, displaying the day's contract details. Torsion squinted at the text, his thick fingers carefully tapping through the verification procedures. The supervisor's signature was there at the bottom. Just a string of numbers and authorization codes. He'd never met them, probably never would, but that was fine. Numbers were simple, easy to understand. "Cargo transfer complete at Hub Station 447, he read out loud, enjoying the low rumble of his voice in the quiet room. "Delivery schedule to Processing Center 12. His eyes traced over the route map, noting familiar waypoints. Good path, mostly through well-traveled sectors. The manifest scrolled past standard shipping containers, properly sealed and certified. He didn't need to know what was inside of them. Some haulers got curious, tried peeking at the contents, but Torsion preferred not knowing. Made things simpler. His job was moving boxes from one place to another, not wondering what was in them. He remembered watching the loading drones at Hub Station, their articulated arms carefully stacking the containers in his hold. The station's logistics drone had been chatty, as far as drones went. Lots of beeping and status updates. Torsion had nodded along, offering the occasional grunt of acknowledgement. Nice to have company sometimes, even if it was just machines. The route would take them past newer territories, recently charted systems where the navigation beacons still gleamed with that fresh installed shine. Torsion preferred the older sectors, where the beacons had developed their own quirks and personalities. But new paths meant new places for his ship to leave its mark, new stories to add to their shared history. His wrist display flickered with an automated reminder about fuel calculations. He dismissed it with a gentle tap. The ship's systems had already handled that, like they handle most things these days. Still, he pulled up the numbers anyway, checking them over with practiced eyes. Not because he didn't trust the computers, just felt right to know. The stars outside his viewpoint had shifted while he worked, their patterns subtly different. They'd be passing through the trailing edge of the Zealot Expanse soon. Beautiful region, lots of young stars painting the void in shades of blue and white. Torsion always enjoyed this part of the route, even if the radiation meant extra work for the shield drones. Movement caught his eye. One of the maintenance drones skittered past his door, probably heading to fix that temperamental coolant valve in Section 3. He'd noticed it acting up during his morning walk, but the ship's systems had already flagged it for repair before he could file a report. Efficient little beings, these drones. Still, he made a mental note to check on the repair later, just to be thorough. The contract details finished downloading to his personal terminal with a soft ping. Everything in order, everything following procedure. Torsion leaned back in his chair, feeling the familiar texture of his worn uniform against his rough skin. Some haulers complained about the company's strict protocols, all the automated systems and preset routes. But Torsion understood. Structure was good, gave everything its proper place. He pulled up the navigation display, watching the plotted course stretch out before them like a path through the stars. Straightforward work for straightforward folk. Just the way he liked it. The way it should be. The ship hummed contently around him, its systems working in perfect harmony. Torsion smiled, his fingers absently tracing the worn edges of his control panel. Together, they'd make this run just like all the others. Clean and simple. The way cargo hauling was meant to be. Ready for another good day, he murmured to his ship, and settled in to watch the expanse drift by. The first sign that something was different came during Torsion's midday systems check. A small alert, barely noticeable among the usual status updates and drone reports. Some kind of signal, weak but persistent, repeating on a frequency he'd never seen before. He shifted in his chair, scratching at a thick chunk of his chin. The signal didn't match any of the patterns from his training videos. Not a standard distress call, not a navigation beacon, not even the encrypted bursts pirates sometimes use as bait. Just a simple, steady pulse with some kind of encoded message. "Computer?" His deep voice resonated through the bridge. "Analyze signal pattern." The system hummed obligingly, comparing the signal against his database. No matches found. Torsion's brow furrowed. rough skin creasing with concentration. That was odd. The computer knew all the standard frequencies: commercial, military, even those ancient automated beacons from the early expansion era. The signal pulsed again, slightly stronger now. Must be getting closer to whatever was broadcasting it. Torsion pulled up the directional data, noting its location relative to his plotted course. Not too far off his route, maybe half a day's detour at most. He should probably report it to corporate first. That's what the manual said to do with unexpected signals. But the thought of waiting for their response, watching those bureaucratic authorization codes crawl across his screen while someone might need help out there. The maintenance drones didn't hesitate if they found something wrong with the ship. They'd just fix it. Simple problem, simple solution. Maybe this was the same thing. Probably just some old beacon using outdated protocols, he reasoned out loud, already adjusting their course. Should at least check. Make sure nothing's wrong. The ship's system accepted the course change without complaint, readjusting their fuel calculations and updating their estimated arrival time at Processing Center 12. The cargo would still arrive well within schedule, no harm in a small detour. As they drew closer, Torsion reviewed the emergency response protocols. Not that he needed to, really. 15 years of hauling cargo through deep space taught you what to do when someone needed help. Check for hazards, establish communication, assess the situation, render assistance. Simple steps for simple problems. The signal grew steadily stronger, its rhythm now clearly distinct from the standard background noise of space. Something about it felt almost desperate, like someone trying to make themselves understood without knowing quite how. Torsion understood that feeling. He wasn't always great with words himself, especially the fancy ones corporate liked to use. Sometimes simpler was better. Sometimes you just had to show up and help. The nav computer chimed, indicating they were approaching the signal's source. Torsion straightened in his chair, adjusting his uniform out of habit. Whatever he found out there, he'd handle it the way he handled everything else. One step at a time. No fuss, no complications. After all, that's what space truckers did. They helped where they could, kept the cargo flowing, and didn't make things more difficult than they needed to be. Simple problems, simple solutions. The stars continued their eternal dance through his viewport as the ship adjusted its course, carrying them towards whatever waited ahead. Torsion stepped back, patient and ready. Just another day in deep space. Torsion spotted the vessel against the starfield long before the sensors could give him a proper reading. Its design was unlike anything in his experience. All straight edges and blocky shapes where most ships favored smooth curves. The hull seemed impossibly thick in places, unnecessarily reinforced, as if its builders hadn't quite trusted space itself. That's different, he muttered, zooming the external cameras for a better look. The ship's engine configuration made no sense to his eyes. A cluster of massive cylinders arranged in ways that defied standard thrust calculations. Yet it clearly had worked, at least until whatever left it drifting out here. His ship's computer interfaced with the vessel automatically, trying to establish basic connections. To Torsion's surprise, the system were almost primitive in their simplicity. His standard diagnostic protocols sliced through their security like it wasn't there, gaining access to their core functions with barely a pause. The damage reports began flowing across his screen. Power fluctuations in multiple systems, navigation computers offline, life support stable but running on backup power. His maintenance drones were already calculating repair procedures, their problem-solving routines undaunted by the unfamiliar technology. At least something makes sense, Torsion said, watching the first repair drone detach from his ship. The little machine adjusted its programming on the fly, adapting its tools to interface with the strange vessel's systems. These drones had been working on ships longer than he had. They knew their business. But when he tried accessing their communication system, hoping to talk to whoever was aboard, his computer found something it couldn't handle. The language encoding was completely foreign, operating on principles it couldn't begin to process. Each attempt at translation produced nothing but gibberish. Torsion scratched his rough chin, considering. The ship's occupants were still alive. Internal sensors confirmed that much. But he had no way to talk to them. No way to explain what his drones were doing. For all they knew, his repair units could be boarding machines sent to cause harm. The maintenance drones paused in their work, awaiting his decision. Torsion studied the strange ship again, noting signs of a long journey. Worn patches on the hull plating, improvised repairs, the kind of weathering that just came from pushing too far on too little. Someone out there trying to make their way through space, just like him. He remembered his early days as a hauler, when every docking procedure felt like a puzzle, and every repair was a lesson learned the hard way. The relief when someone more experienced stepped in to help, even if they couldn't exactly speak the same technical language. "Keep working," he told the drones. "Fix what needs fixing. We'll sort out the rest later." The repair units resumed their tasks, methodically addressing each system failure. Torsion watched their progress, making notes of anything unusual. He'd need to document this properly for his report, assuming he could figure out how to explain finding a ship that by all appearances shouldn't exist. Through his viewport, he could see movement inside the other vessel, its crew watching his drones work, probably just as confused by his ship's appearance as he was by theirs. But they weren't interfering, weren't showing signs of panic. They understood the universal language of repair work, at least. The stars wheeled slowly past his ship, maintained position, keeping the damaged vessel in its docking field. Torsion settled in to wait, his thick fingers drumming gently on his armrest. Some problems needed time to solve themselves. He could be patient. The repair drones flagged a section of hull damage that would require evacuation to fix properly. Torsion stared at the warning message, then at the strange ship's main viewport, where he could see its crew watching his drones work. Getting them to understand, this was going to be interesting. He activated the main communications display, making sure it was visible through both ships' windows. If they couldn't share words, maybe pictures could work. The screen lit up with a simple diagram showing their ship, the damaged section, and big red warning symbols that hopefully meant danger in any language. Movement caught his eye. The beings on the other ship had pressed closer to their viewports, and Torsion got his first clear look at them. His thick fingers froze on the controls. They looked almost like his own kind, but wrong in ways that made his head hurt. Their skin was impossibly thin, practically transparent. He could see blood vessels underneath, pulsing with each heartbeat. Their hair was like thousands of tiny, delicate spines, so fine they waved in the recycled air of the ship. And their faces, so mobile, so expressive, features shifting with each reaction. One of them pointed at his display, gesturing to their companions. Their mouths moved rapidly, but even if he could have heard them, their language was still completely foreign. Still, they seemed to be discussing his warning. Torsion gathered his courage and tried adding to his diagram, a simple annotation showing their ship connecting to his, then the crew moving over while the repair work was done. He made sure to include his drones in the image. They'd seen those already, so maybe that would help them understand. The beings conferred again, their thin faces animated with discussion. One of them, taller than the others, with darker coloring, made a gesture that might have been agreement. They turned back to the viewport and nodded vigorously at Torsion. "Good," he rumbled, though they couldn't hear him. "That's good. Now for the hard part." The docking procedure was surprisingly smooth, their ship's systems adapting easily to his computer's guidance. But when the airlock indicators turned green, Torsion found himself hesitating. He'd need to meet them in person to guide them to temporary quarters. The thought of facing these strange, fragile-looking beings made his rough skin prickle. But they needed help, and he'd committed to giving it. Torsion squared his broad shoulders and headed for the airlock, practicing his most non-threatening posture. Given how much larger he was than them, that seemed important. The inner door cycled open, and 5 pairs of eyes stared up at him. This close, they seemed even more delicate. Their thin clothing looked barely sturdy enough to hold together, let alone protect them from anything. Yet they stood straight and proud, showing no fear of his massive frame. The dark-colored one stepped forward, pressing a hand to its chest. Sound emerged from its mouth, carefully enunciated. Frederick Pollock. A name. That was a good start. Torsion touched his own chest, trying to modulate his deep voice to something less intimidating. Torsion Conbrake. That being, Frederick, smiled, an expression that transformed their entire face. They gestured to their companions, speaking each name with the same careful emphasis. Susan Armstrong, Samantha Keyes, Terry York, Adriana Katzen. Torsion nodded to each in turn, noting subtle variations in their coloring and features. They watched him with bright, alert eyes, their face showing emotions he couldn't begin to interpret. But their body language was clear enough, cautious but willing to trust. He gestured down the corridor, making what he hoped was a welcoming motion. Frederick nodded again and said something to the others. They fell into line behind Torsion, their footsteps impossibly light on his deck plates. As he led them towards the temporary quarters, Torsion couldn't help marveling at how this was now his life. Here he was, a simple cargo hauler, playing host to beings that looked like they'd break if he shook their hand. But they moved with confidence, despite their fragile appearance, taking in his ship with obvious curiosity. Space was full of surprises, it seemed, best just to take them as they came. The repair took longer than expected, but not because of any technical issues. Torsion's drones worked as efficiently as ever, methodically fixing each problem they encountered. No, what slowed things down was his guests' fascination with every aspect of his ship. They figured out the food synthesizers quickly enough, though their reactions to standard protein blocks had been interesting. But everything else seemed to captivate them. The environmental controls, the drone control interfaces, even the simple status displays that lined the corridors. They studied it all with an intensity that made Torsion's spines itch. Frederick, in particular, spent hours watching the maintenance drones work, recording everything on some kind of primitive data device. Sometimes, he'd point to specific tools or techniques, speaking rapidly to his companions in their musical language. Their excitement was obvious, even if their words weren't. Torsion found himself making excuses to check on them more often than strictly necessary. They were fascinating to watch, these fragile beings with their quick movements and expressive faces. They communicated constantly with gestures and expressions, their features shifting through emotions faster than he could track. The one called Susan managed to convey through an elaborate series of gestures that their ship's computer system had been upgraded by his drones. She seemed pleased about this, though Torsion hadn't exactly ordered that specific repair. The drones must have decided it was necessary. They were thorough that way. When the final repairs were complete, Torsion led them back to their ship's airlock. They'd left their temporary quarters spotless, everything arranged exactly as they'd found it. That spoke well of them, whatever species they were. Before boarding their vessel, Frederick turned to Torsion and pointed to the name painted on the corridor wall, Stellar Wanderer, in standard trade script. He repeated the words carefully, clearly trying to memorize them. Then he drew something from his pocket, a small device that resembled a data crystal, but made of metal, that gleamed in the soft lighting. Torsion accepted it carefully between his thick fingers, worried he might crush the delicate object. But Frederick mimed inserting it into a computer terminal, then pointed to his own ship. Some kind of record of their vessel, perhaps? Torsion nodded his understanding. One by one, they repeated their names to him again. Torsion wondered if this was some kind of ritual for their people, but he responded in kind, speaking his own name as clearly as he could. Their attempts to pronounce Torsion Conbrake were interesting. their soft voices struggling with his language's harsher sounds. They filed back into their ship with final gestures of farewell. Through the viewport, Torshin watched them return to their stations, their movements more confident now, aided by the numerous system upgrades his drones had installed. The ship's power signature was stronger, steadier. The airlock cycle closed. Torshin returned to his bridge, watching as their ships disengaged from his docking clamps. The vessel's primitive engines flared to life, now burning clean and bright after their repairs. For a moment, their strange ship hung against the starfield, its blocky shape somehow more elegant now that he understood its purpose. Then they were gone, accelerating away on their original course. Torshin sat quietly for a while, thinking about thin-skinned beings who showed no fear of his rough appearance, who treated his simple cargo hauler like it was full of wonders. He updated his log with the basic facts: assistance rendered, repairs completed. The encounter itself he recorded as non-standard rescue operation. Let corporate make what they would of that. The data crystal he secured in his personal storage. Something told him it might be important someday. The autopilot chimed, reminding him of the delivery schedule. Torshin plotted the course correction that would return them to their original route. The cargo still needed delivering. After all, that's what space truckers did. But as the stars wheeled past his viewport, he found himself wondering what other surprises waited out in the dark between worlds. Maybe there was more to the galaxy than simple cargo runs, though the cargo runs were still good too. The first changes were so small, Torshin barely noticed them. New software updates for the ship's systems, additional maintenance drones with more advanced programming, automated loading procedures that didn't need his oversight. Little things that made his job easier, or so the memos claimed. He watched the news feeds sometimes during his increasingly empty shifts. Humanity, that's what they called themselves, had joined the galactic community barely months after his encounter with them. Their progress was remarkable, the commentator said. Unprecedented adaptation to advanced technologies, revolutionary approaches to automation and artificial intelligence. The observation lounge's viewpoints still showed that tiny stress fracture, but Torshin didn't check it as often anymore. The drones had their own inspection routines now, more thorough than his daily walks had ever been. They maintained everything at peak efficiency, correcting small issues before they could develop into actual problems. His wrist display chimed with another contract notification. The text scrolled past automatically. Cargo already loaded, course already plotted, maintenance already scheduled. He didn't even need to acknowledge it anymore. The system would handle everything. Stellar Wanderer's corridors felt longer these days, emptier. The maintenance drones worked silently, their programming streamlined for maximum efficiency. They no longer stopped to interact with him, no longer needed his guidance or approval. His morning rounds became shorter and sporadic, then nearly stopped altogether. The worn patches on the walls where his hands had smoothed the metal remained untouched. The cleaning drones were programmed to preserve signs of the ship's history, another thoughtful feature of their latest upgrade. But no new marks appeared. No new history was being made. His captain's chair still creaked when he shifted his bulk, but he spent less time in it now. There was no point watching the status displays when he couldn't override their automated decisions. No reason to monitor course corrections that happened without his input. No need for a captain at all, really. The message came during what would have been his mid-shift break, if shifts still meant anything. A priority communication from corporate, marked for immediate attention. Torshin's thick fingers trembled slightly as he accepted the transmission. The faces that appeared on his screen were perfectly maintained, their skin polished to a mere shine, their spines uniformly trimmed and styled. The board members all wore identical expressions of practiced concern. "Torshin Conbrake," the one in the center spoke in plain, level, apathetic voice. "Your years of service are appreciated. However, recent advances in automation have made your position redundant. He stared at their sculpted features, trying to find some distinction between them, but they were like parts from an assembly line, identical products of corporate efficiency. A generous severance package had been arranged. They continued, "Your authorization codes will be deactivated at the end of this transmission. Please ensure all personal effects are removed before the ship reaches its next port." The screen blinked dark before he could respond. His wrist display flickered once, then showed basic time and environmental data. All his access, all his authority, stripped away in seconds. Torsion sat in his darkened quarters, feeling the ship's familiar vibration through his thick skin. Soon, even that would be gone. All his years of service, all his pride in being a simple cargo hauler doing honest work, reduced to a severance payment and an automated dismissal. His personal storage unit still held that data crystal from the humans, untouched since the strange encounter. He'd never found out what was on it, never needed to know. Back then, just doing his job had been enough. The automated systems hummed efficiently around him, maintaining their perfect routines without human or Xrelics intervention. Torsion closed his eyes, trying to remember when the ship had felt alive instead of just well-maintained. When space trucking had meant something more than watching machines work. Trade Station 447 looked different from ground level. Torsion huddled in his usual corner of the lower market, watching feet and wheels and hovers units pass by. He'd never noticed before how the deck plates here were worn almost paper thin, or how the environmental systems struggled to keep up with the endless flow of bodies and cargo. His severance pay had lasted 8 months, might have stretched it to 9 if he'd found cheaper lodging, but even the station's worst quarters weren't built for someone his size. Now home was whatever he could find space to sit without being in the way. The market's morning crowd flowed around him like a river around a stone. Beings of all species hurried past, intent on their business. Most ignored him completely. Some tossed him credits or ration cards out of pity. A few sneered at the sight of Xrelics, reduced to begging, their own carefully maintained features twisted with disgust. Torsion kept his head down, his rough skin collecting grime that no maintenance drone would ever clean anyway. He'd stopped maintaining his spines months ago. They grew wild and tangled now, like vegetation on some abandoned world. His face has accumulated new ridges and textures that would have horrified corporate's appearance standards. A pair of station security drones zipped past on their patrol route, scanning for contraband and troublemakers. They barely recognized his appearance anymore, just another piece of background scenery, as much a fixture of this corner as the worn deck plates and struggling ventilation systems. He didn't even look up when another pair of feet stopped in front of him. Probably just someone else, with spare credits and a moment of charity. But then a voice spoke, aged but familiar, struggling with the hard sounds of his name. Torsion Conbrake? Something in that voice, that particular way of mangling his name, made him raise his head. The being standing before him was older, their thin skin showing signs of age, but those expressive features were unmistakable. The same dark coloring, the same confident stance. Frederick Pollock, Torsion said slowly, the words feeling strange in his mouth after so long. The human's face transformed with one of those lightning-fast expressions, joy. Torsion thought, though he still wasn't sure. Frederick crouched down, bringing himself to Torsion's seated eye level. His thin-skinned features creased with concern as he took in Torsion's disheveled state. "What happened?" Frederick asked, gesturing to encompass Torsion's situation. The words were in trade speak now. Humanity had learned quickly, but that same careful enunciation remained. Torsion's lumpy, calloused fingers twisted together in his lap. Shame made his voice rougher than usual. "Automation. No need for cargo haulers anymore. No need for..." He trailed off, unable to finish. Frederick's face darkened with another rapid expression change. He stood suddenly, speaking rapidly into some kind of communication device. Torsion caught fragments of the human language he'd first heard years ago on his ship. Then Frederick turned back to him, extending one fragile-looking hand. "Come with me, please." Torsion stared at the offered hand. "I couldn't impose." "You saved our lives," Frederick cut him off. "Let me help save yours." Those expressive features showed no deception, no hidden motives, just the same straightforward trust Torsion remembered from their first meeting, when he was still someone who could help others instead of needing help himself. Slowly, carefully, he reached up and took the human's hand. Frederick's grip was stronger than his thin skin suggested, helping Torsion lever his bulk upright. Station dwellers scattered at the sight of him, rising to his full height. "My apartment isn't far," Frederick said, already leading the way. "We have a lot to talk about." Torsion followed, his heavy footsteps echoing on those worn deck plates one last time. Behind him, the morning crowd flowed into the space he'd occupied, erasing all trace of his presence. Another change in the station's endless routine. But for the first time in months, he walked with his head up, watching where he was going instead of where he'd been. Frederick's apartment was small by station standards, but filled with items Torsion had never seen before. Physical books, old-style display screens, and what looked like pieces of machinery in various stages of disassembly. The human cleared a space at a cluttered table, offering Torsion the room's only reinforced chair. "Tea?" Frederick asked, already moving to what Torsion recognized as a primitive food preparation area. "Or I might have some protein blocks somewhere, kept a few, for nostalgia's sake." Torsion watched him work, noting how the years had weathered Frederick's thin features, without diminishing their expressiveness. "What happened after you saved us?" Frederick's face creased in what Torsion now recognized as a smile. "That's quite a story. The others would tell it better. They're all doing well, by the way. Susan's running the FTL research division at Europa Labs. Samantha joined the diplomatic corps. Terry's teaching xenophysics at Oxford. Adriana," he chuckled, "well, she is an admiral now." He set 2 steaming cups on the table, settling into the chair opposite of Torsion. "But I'm getting ahead of myself. You should know what you really did that day." Fredericks took a long sip of his tea, gathering his thoughts. "We were testing humanity's first FTL drive, experimental design, based on theories that most of our scientists said were impossible. The test was supposed to be a simple jump, just far enough to prove the concept, but something went wrong." His expression grew distant. "The drive malfunctioned, threw us way off course, damaged most of our systems. We were running out of air, no idea where we were, broadcasting on every frequency we could think of. Then your ship appeared." "Just a simple rescue," Torsion rumbled, embarrassed. "Anyone would have." "No," Frederick cut him off gently. "Most wouldn't. We learned that later, after joining the galactic community. Most species follow strict non-interference protocols with uncontacted civilizations. But you just saw someone who needed help and gave it." He reached for something on a nearby shelf, an old data pad. "Those upgrades your drones installed, they saved more than our lives. They gave us working examples of advanced technology, showed us where our theories had gone wrong. The data crystal we gave you, that was our ship's complete technical database. We hoped someone would find it and understand why we've been out there." "I never looked at it," Torsion admitted. "Didn't seem important at the time." Frederick's laugh was warm and genuine. "That's exactly why what you did mattered so much. You helped us without wanting anything in return, without even knowing what we were." He activated the pad, showing Torsion images that made his spines bristle. Earth, humanity's home world, choked with pollution and depleted resources. We were desperate. Our planet was dying. The FTL project was our last hope. The images were changed, showing clean cities, restored landscapes. The technology we learned from your ship's drones, it didn't just fix our FTL drive. It showed us how to clean our atmosphere, restore our ecosystems. Saved billions of lives. His voice grew soft. All because one cargo hauler decided to answer an unknown distress call. Torsion stared into his cooling tea, overwhelmed. Didn't know, he managed finally. Just did my job. Exactly, Frederick said. That's why I've spent the last few years looking for you. Humanity owes you a debt, Torsion Conbreak. A debt we didn't even know about until recently, when Adriana finally managed to decode your ship's registry from our old sensor logs. He pulled out another device, a modern communication unit. The others are waiting to thank you properly. They'll be here within a day. His thin features showed another smile. I hope you don't mind, but once they heard I found you. Torsion's rough hands trembled slightly around his cup. Don't deserve all this, he protested. Was just being decent. Just helping where I could. That's exactly why you deserve it, Frederick replied softly. In a galaxy full of protocols and procedures, you chose to do right. And that choice changed everything. They talked through the night, Frederick sharing stories of humanity's progress, while Torsion spoke of his years hauling cargo through the stars. Two beings from vastly different worlds, brought together by a chance encounter that meant nothing to one and everything to the other. When morning came, Frederick's communication unit chimed. They're here, he said, standing. Ready to meet some old friends? Torsion rose carefully, suddenly conscious of his unkempt appearance. But Frederick just smiled that quirky human smile. Don't worry, he said. They'll be glad to see you, exactly as you are. The news broke across Earth's networks first, then rippled outward through the galactic community. Holoscreens everywhere filled with the story, images of a simple cargo hauler who had unknowingly saved humanity, juxtaposed with shots of Earth's restored landscapes and thriving colonies. The man who saved mankind, the headlines proclaimed. Historians and journalists pieced together the chain of events, how a single act of kindness had preserved the data and expertise that revolutionized human technology. How 5 lives saved had translated into billions spared from environmental collapse. But more than that, the story resonated with people on a deeper level. In an age of increasing automation and corporate efficiency, here was proof that simple decency still mattered. That one individual choosing to help without expectation of reward could change the course of history. Support poured in from every corner of human space, but the response went beyond mere charity. Scientists and engineers, inspired by Torsion's story, began developing new programs, ways to preserve meaningful work in an automated galaxy, ways to ensure that efficiency didn't come at the cost of connection. A movement grew, spreading from Earth to the colonies and beyond. The Torsion Initiative, they called it. Finding jobs that machines couldn't do, creating roles that required understanding instead of just programming. Teaching automated systems to assist rather than replace. Torsion himself watched it unfold with quiet amazement. The simple cargo hauler, who had once walked his ship's corridors, now found himself walking through research centers and administrative halls. Not as a relic of the past, but as living proof that some things couldn't be automated. Some choices had to be made by thinking, feeling beings who understood the value of stopping to help. The corporate world that had discarded him discovered, somewhat too late, that humans placed immense value on those who had helped them. Companies scrambling to adopt Torsion Initiative principles found themselves dealing with a species that remembered both kindness and callousness with equal charity. But what mattered most to Torsion wasn't the programs or the policies. It was the message, carried on the same lanes he had once hauled cargo through, that in an age of perfect efficiency, there was still room for imperfect kindness. That sometimes the simplest actions, stopping to help, choosing to care, could echo across decades and change worlds. He found himself thinking of those worn patches on the Stellar Wanderer's walls, marks left by years of simple work done with pride. Perhaps that was humanity's real gift to the galaxy. Not their technology or their adaptability, but their ability to recognize and remember the value of honest work and basic decency. The stars wheeled on their ancient courses, unchanged by the dramas of living beings. But among those stars, something had shifted. A simple choice, made years ago in the darkness between worlds, had reminded an entire civilization of something they had almost forgotten. A simple choice, a simple kindness.